So joining me on the podcast today, a man he's been on the pod before, but where I've just kind of maintained the status quo. He's risen to heights unseen. Joining Sam Vecini on the Game Theory podcast. Originally, the first time we interacted, Bryce, it was because of the Pistons Pulse, the Detroit Pistons podcast, which you co-host with Amari Sankofa, doing great Pistons podcast content, for years at this point. And then you've become a national pundit, really, over the course of time that I've known you. So now I get to bend your ear both about the Pistons and just your thoughts about the NBA as a whole. Bryce, thanks for carving out time to come on Fear the Fro.
Yeah, I don't know about the rise or however you frame that, but I appreciate the intro. Most importantly, you've become a good friend. We talk about our young children. If my wife wakes up with the dog, maybe I will present our new dog, Winnie, to your podcast. If it does go video, I don't know if...
I think it will. If I can edit it quick enough, it definitely will. So
I showed Winnie on the Pistons Pulse, and we immediately got pushback that this was the Pistons Pulse, not the puppy pulse. Get the dog off the episode. I also have to let you know, Bob, that when my students Google me, like once they find out that I played college basketball and do podcasts, one of the first things that comes up apparently when you Google my name is my war on, what is it, Girl Scout cookies or whatever graphic you made on one of my appearances. So thank you for the eternal Bryce Simon hates the Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, I mean, between your hatred of Girl Scout cookies
and mac and cheese, the other one was mac and cheese.
For mac and cheese. Yes, there's an undercurrent of food hatred, but I'm going to try to steer clear of that this time. I'm going to try to just keep it all joy and happiness, because unlike in past seasons, I shouldn't even say this because last season was a good season for you guys too, but it's a complete turnabout in the sense of, I don't know how many people coming into the season. I guess that's a good place to start, Bryce. If I approached you before the season started, realistically, did you have any expectation that the Pistons would put together a season like we've seen so far?
Real quick, also, I probably will be eating mac and cheese tonight. It is a Friday during Lent, and so mac and cheese is definitely going to be on the menu, just for the record.
Do you steer those decisions, or is that your wife?
What's that?
Do you steer the menu decisions, or is that your wife during?
No, that's my. I will be going to the grocery store at some point today, and I will be asking her like tater tots, like what can we get to add into all that to get away from. It seems like a lot of cheese on these days, but it's probably some mac and cheese while I'm watching this Pistons Cavs game. No, I know I didn't. I think I had the Pistons 5th in my own preseason rankings. I had the Cavs Knicks 1-2. I was a huge Atlanta Hawks guy, obviously was wrong there. I thought the Magic were in a good place, obviously was wrong there. I think you can chalk that one up a little bit more to injury stuff, maybe some other things going on in Orlando, some other decisions that might have to be made, some tough ones there. I had Detroit 5th. I don't know, Bob, listen, we always love to talk about internal growth with young guys, right? And that's always cool, but really, what did Detroit do that gave you confidence in terms of actual roster construction that they were going to be that much better than what we saw 1 year ago? And I don't know that there was in terms of the actual moves they made. What did happen was some real internal growth. I think Cade has come back even better. I know we're going to get into that. Jalen Duren is a most improved, at least, candidate. Like, he should be in the conversation. His offensive growth, I don't know that people realize how much better he is offensively. We'll see how that plays out tonight against Cleveland or on Friday night. A couple games coming up. And then I give a lot of credit to JB. I don't know that people always love to hear the culture, chemistry, whatever conversation, identity. This team has an identity, and we'll see how it plays out in the playoffs. But they are, to me, one of the best teams in the NBA. And that's not just a defensive rating stat. They are night in and night out one of the best defensive teams, one of the hardest playing teams. And they just have a lot of players that lean into that and do that. And they have some guys that are winning on the margins. Dennis Jenkins, Javonte Green gives them good minutes. Paul Reed gives them good minutes whenever you have your two centers suspended. And right now, Isaiah Stewart still out. So to answer, long way to a short answer, no, I didn't have these expectations. And I don't think most people did either. Real quick. That's why I think JB deserves a lot of Coach of the Year conversation. People will immediately go to Joe Mazzulla, and rightfully so. Nobody expected Boston to be where they're at. True. Know what else nobody expected? Detroit to be where they're at. So don't, I think JB deserves just as much Coach of the Year conversations as Joe Mazzulla for exceeding expectations that his team had coming into the year.
If you had to predict who would win it between those two guys, I mean, because to me, when you bring it up, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that, honestly. But to me, I think it's JB, no brainer, personally. I don't know what the Vegas odds say at this point, but I think I understand, the conversations about Jaylen Brown and about Joe Mazzulla and about them exceeding expectations. But I always felt like Boston was a team we shouldn't have been underselling anyway. And this is going to sound like a Tatum drag. I don't necessarily mean it like that, but I always feel like people have over-indexed. I shouldn't say I think they've over-indexed Tatum. I think they've undersold the cast that he had around him. And I get that they came off Porzingis, but he wasn't reliable. Drew is getting long in the tooth. Yes, they've played without Tatum, but this whole time, guys like Pritchard, Jordan Walsh, Cade, like they've risen up in the same way that we have these conversations about, okay, you're getting more from unexpected places. I always felt like the luxury of having a $8 million Peyton Pritchard, like dollar to value, that's one of the best guys in the league. And opportunity, it's similar to how I felt about Ty Jerome, and kind of we're seeing that now that he comes back. I think he's always been one of those players who it seems like a luxury when you have a team with Tatum and that whole roster there. But when they need Pritchard, he's a perfectly capable NBA starter level player when given the opportunity.
So I think you were going to ask if I think that who will win it.
Oh yeah.
No, you're good. If Detroit ends up with 5+ lead in the standings by the end of the year, I think JB goes ahead and wins it. Detroit is in a really important stretch of their season for regular season stretches. Whenever you already have a 5.5 game lead, they played San Antonio recently, which is the game that, if you want to point to some concerns, that's one. San Antonio was awesome that night. They played not a healthy at all Oklahoma City team. That was kind of a letdown just in terms of the matchup. They have a couple games against Cleveland. They go to San Antonio again. They have a game at Orlando. So my point is they're going through some tough games here down the stretch. Don't have a whole lot of rest, anything like that. If they end up 5 or 6 games ahead of the Celtics or more, I just think it's hard to justify JB not being Coach of the Year, because I think sometimes the narrative is, what are the flaws of your team that you're overcoming? And I can very quickly give you the Pistons' flaws that JB is overcoming to them being one of the best teams in the NBA.
Well, let's hear those. Let's expound on that a little bit, because I think about the JB experience. Truthfully, Bryce, one of the things I keep thinking during this season is, I think you would probably agree with me that despite Detroit's record and leading the East and having the best record in the NBA, there's a built-in skepticism that it will translate to playoff basketball. The same thing happened to the Cavs. They win 64 games last year, and there was a lot of, well, we'll prove it. If you want me to buy into you, prove it. Because, and some of that, I understand. Last year, Cade had his struggles in the playoffs from a shooting perspective, even though that was a hard-fought series. I think there's people who are skeptical about the same things they were skeptical about with us. JB was such a defensive-minded coach, but the question was, is he capable of making the changes to the offense that's necessary when you're really taking on those defenses that are cued in on, taking Cade out of the game in the playoffs? What is your level of confidence that you can overcome all the criticisms we hear out there about the shooting and, well, you don't have a secondary ball handler and like that type of stuff? What do you think has changed year to year that gives you more confidence that this year the story will be different?
I don't think I do, to answer your question. I think the 4 teams in the East I'm excited. One thing I've consistently pitched for a couple months now over on Game Theory is, while people may think the Eastern Conference is the lesser conference, it's not going to be the less competitive conference come playoff time. I think if we get the 4 teams that I think are the best 4 teams in the Eastern Conference semifinals, I think those matchups are going to be incredible, regardless of how they end up matching up. And that's obviously the Cavs, the Celtics, Tatumless or Tatum with, whatever the saying would be better there. You can insert that. Obviously the Knicks and the Pistons. And I think some of those series would just be incredible. So I can't just say like Detroit is my runaway favorite to win the East. I recently had the Knicks over them. Now I would change that today because I think my confidence in the Knicks is waning.
Especially after this February for Detroit against New York. That's gotta shift some perception.
So I don't know who I feel more confident in. I like the Cavs a lot more than what, my guy Sam does, and we'll get into that as well. But I think everything you said is exactly what concerns me. Can you play all of these non-shooters in a playoff series when a team has you night in and night out and figures out, okay, well, they have Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson on the court. They have Ron Holland on the court. They have Javonte Green, who's shooting 36%, but do we really trust him? We have Dennis Jenkins, who's been incredible and earned his way off the two-way, but is that a guy that we have to really worry about as a secondary creator? How do you survive the 8 to 10 minutes when Cade is off the court? What's Tobias Harris going to bring? Pistons fans got mad at me when I said that Spurs game was an indictment of everything I worry about in the playoffs, and rightfully so. It's fair. It's a one-game regular season game, and the Spurs might have the best defense in the NBA when they're fully healthy. And I think the Thunder, Wemby with Steph Castle at his best, and that is incredible. They don't have as many guys as the Thunder, but just like in a singular possession. But it all showed up in that game. Tobias was a complete non-factor. Duncan Robinson was cold, and San Antonio had multiple on-ball defenders to throw at Cade. And offensively, it was just a struggle all night long. And so that's my concern. Now, the issue, or I guess the positive thing for the Pistons, is what team in the East can do that to Detroit? Are the Knicks going to be able to do that for a series? Can they replicate that somehow with Mitchell Robinson and Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby? My answer is no, based off what we've seen, but maybe. I think the Cavs have the interior defense to do it. Do the Cavs have the exterior, the perimeter defense to do it? Which I'm interested to hear your answer on that.
Okay.
And then go ahead. Real quick,
I've been sitting on this one. I was listening to the Pistons Pulse podcast, and we had a similar conversation there. Yes. It was about now you said essentially what you said here, which is that if you were to pick a team that you think could be most problematic, I believe what you said was, for a while you didn't feel this way, but now you believe that the Cavs might be the one who presents the problem to the Pistons. I agree with that for multiple reasons. And this didn't necessarily get brought up on the podcast, but I wanted to get your reaction to it. One of the things that was discussed it was you, Omari, and was it
Laz Jackson, who I just quick shout out to Laz. Laz gave me my start. You mentioned the multiple years I've done Piston stuff. Laz was at Detroit Bad Boys with Sean Corp, and they were the ones that gave me somewhere to write and somewhere for my podcast to sit. And then that became the video breakdowns and then the growth and et cetera, et cetera. So Laz literally is one of the 2 or 3 most important people that have contributed to my early opportunities to get where I am now. And so I always want to give Laz that shout out.
And that's one thing I love about your podcast, not to sidetrack this, but the fact, I'm a pile of garbage. I find myself getting angry when I hear takes on other podcasts that are Cavalier podcasts that I don't agree with. And I try to bury it deep down inside, but sometimes I can feel myself being snippy. And I'm like, Bryce is cultivated. He's just such a good human being that none of this stuff, he lets it roll off his back. And that's why I was excited about this podcast today, because I know when there's people, the fact that we're friends and the fact that we have this history beyond the podcast, fellow Kansans, I know I can present to you things that I want to hear your pushback on, which is one of the things that got brought up on the podcast was skepticism that the Cavs had the perimeter defense to be able to hold the Pistons in check. Now, my argument there would be, I think that we're overlooking Kansas native Dean Wade, and even to a smaller degree, I don't know if he'll be in the rotation, quite frankly, so I don't know if this is fair to bring up. But I thought Tyson, Tomlin, and Wade all did very well against Cade Cunningham specifically. And I understand the regular season is not the postseason, but in the 2 games against the Cavs this year, he's shooting 28-25 splits. And he's 3 for 12 from outside. Most of his damage has been done at the free throw stripe. He's a -20. Cade has not. Now, he's lit the Cavs up in the past, previous seasons. I don't want to paint this 2 games this year as indicative of what he can do. He can absolutely kill the Cavs. But I think for that to happen, because they're so dominant on the interior, the way that Cade can bury you is if his outside shot is falling. I don't think the Cavs are quite as deficient from a perimeter defense situation as some of the other East contenders. And I understand why people say that to a certain extent, because a lot of it was size-based at least prior to the Harden addition. A lot of it was, well, they've got two smaller guys on the perimeter. But I think what we see when the Cavs play Detroit is that they've got two bigs who can slant to that side, which makes it way more difficult for a very tall guard in Cade to get to the rim with ease. And then they have Dean Wade, who, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this stat. I'm sure you probably are. But Dean Wade, he's held Brunson to 1 for 15 shooting this year. Before the game that we beat them by 15 the other night, he'd held him to 0 of 11. So this is a guy that I think people view him as a big, but he gets deployed as a perimeter defender just as much as he gets deployed in those situations where he's got a wall up against bigs. So assuming he's healthy and he's tweaked his ankle, a different one, yet again, who knows if that's the case when the postseason rolls around. I think the frenetic energy of guys like Tomlin, Keon Ellis, who you did bring up on the podcast, by the way, and even Jalen Tyson to some degree, I think the Cavs are better positioned to take Cade out of games than they were in previous seasons. And secondarily to that, what I did wholeheartedly agree with you on, and it's funny because you have this conversation on your podcast about how you feel like the Spurs may be the most difficult defense that the Pistons face off against, at least in the West. I think for the Cavs, it's the opposite, because whereas Wemby is unbelievable, generational unicorn type defender, the Cavs being able to deploy two offensively skilled bigs has always given them a bit of a leg up in those matchups with San Antonio. And if you look at how the Cavs have played against San Antonio, the bigs have cooked that team on a regular basis, even with Wemby on the floor. What's killed the Cavs is those physical perimeter defenders of an Oklahoma City. So I feel like our teams, in some ways, I feel like it's an opposite preferred defense that they like to see. I don't think the Cavs are as deterred by dominant inside play. I think the Pistons are more so in a way where, yeah, we don't have the physical defenders of an Oklahoma City, but I think we have enough in the way of perimeter defense to at least put up a better showing against Cade than we have in seasons past. And I don't know if it's just, I know you don't overlook Dean Wade because obviously fellow Kansans were well aware of his exploits. But I do think on a national level, there's a bit of a dismissal just due to his health history or whatever the case may be.
I also want to be clear. I still think Oklahoma City is the best defense in the NBA. I've been trying to find the right phrase to give the Spurs their due credit when Wemby is healthy and on the court, when Steph Castle is healthy and on the court. Here would be my slight pushback. I agree with all of the names you just said, and you will not find a bigger Jalen Tyson fan, Bob. I legitimately get mad and I don't care. I do not care. My fandom is essentially zero when it comes to the NBA anymore because I just watch the game from a different perspective now. Kansas City Chiefs, completely different. That is fanatic all the way, irrational. It's not like I'm a fan. I get mad when they don't start him. They had a game where it wasn't him in the starting lineup when I think they were healthy at the time. You might be able to correct me here. To me, it's just so easy. The starting lineup should be Harden, Mitchell, Tyson, Mobley, Allen. And we can get into that. But to your point, the only thing my slight pushback would be, I don't think any of those guys are Steph Castle. And this may be just a me thing. I think Steph Castle is an all defense level defender right now. And he has this combination of the size, the strength, the perimeter movement, all of that stuff. To your point, though, I do think that I probably didn't give Dean Wade enough credit. So I think they have enough. I don't think it's as legitimate as what I saw the Spurs do to him. One thing I will say is, so I looked back at my notes. This was from just loading up against Cade. The Cavs were already doing that in whatever game it was that they played early. I mean, how early in the season was that when they played? Was that
we played in October? So
yeah,
we played in October and then right around Christmas. And
it was like the fourth game of the year when Cleveland just destroyed them. And even in that game, my notes are they're loading up in the gaps against Cade, bringing the help. They've just really leaned into it. My point is, if Cleveland was leaning into that game 4 of the regular season, can you imagine what they're going to do in game 4 of a playoff series in the Eastern Conference Finals or Eastern Conference semifinals? And to your point, this is my worry. If Duncan Robinson is the only guy on the court that you can even start to worry about, then you're helped. So even if Dean Wade is 85% of Steph Castle at the point of attack against Cade, and Mobley and Allen are 85% of what Wemby does in terms of deterring at the rim, the thing is, you can bring in Donovan Mitchell. I have some really positive notes on Donovan Mitchell as an off-the-ball defender from my last couple of games watching them, where he's like digging at the ball and being disruptive there. Harden has, for all of his defensive flaws, has really good and active hands. And then you still, so this is my worry. And to your point, I think those guys are good enough at the point of attack, and most importantly, have size. And again, you will not find a bigger Keon Ellis fan. I crushed the Kings for months for not playing that dude. So you will not I don't know that he's big enough to guard Cade, though. Like, I do not think he is a good matchup for Cade Cunningham just because of his size. But again, he's off the ball defender, helping off of Asar Thompson or Ron Holland or whoever. He's playing in that gap and digging in. He's going to be really good at that.
Yeah, I've been amazed. This last game, I know we lost to the Bucks, but it's the best I've felt in a loss, because obviously there was no Donovan, no Harden, no Mobley. Allen beasted, but Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder were absolutely unreal in that game. And Keon Ellis, I agree. I'm not looking to him really as a guy that I think they'll deploy much, as a point of attack defender, but just the kind of chaos agent factor of him off ball. Because if they're throwing doubles, triples at Cade, and he's having to get the ball out of his hand, I think we're much more well equipped now, and with the addition of, and obviously you guys know Dennis very well.
He was to be clear, Bob, he was awesome for Detroit last year. I know he's a guy that, for whatever reason, if he wears out his welcome or I don't know Dennis Schroeder, I have no idea. He was very good for the Detroit Pistons over the post-trade deadline and through the one playoff series. He was a great addition to their team, and I could see him doing something very similar for the Cleveland Cavaliers. You guys got better at the deadline, no question. Like, whatever the Garland Harden thing is long term, I don't know. At the end of the day, Harden is healthy and ready to play right now. And sadly, oh shoot! I guess he's not anymore.
Everybody seemed to get dinged up. You got Keon Ellis with a broken finger. Since I haven't even touched on it.
It's on his non-shooting hand, though, right?
Yeah, non-shooting hand. But since I haven't even brought this up to the Cavs fans on the podcast, it is worth noting. Part of the reason this is a big picture conversation with Bryce is because, yes, a lot of the importance of this matchup has been diminished with the expectation that we're not going to see Mitchell, we're not going to see Harden, we may not see Wade, Ellis could be slow, like all those things. I'm expecting this to be the ultimate stat padding Jarrett Allen's eventual Player of the Month award game in this first game. And my hope is just these guys are playing it cautious. Unfortunately, what the Cavs are being robbed here of is we get the Pistons twice in short order. We have the Celtics game, even the Sixers, and then they have an even softer schedule than Detroit has the rest of the way. And neither of these teams exactly have juggernauts. So I think there's a very real possibility. Even if we're talking playoff discussion, we could be talking about Eastern Conference Finals, because I would not be surprised to see the Cavs, even with these injuries. If these are more of the let's play it safe maintenance type stuff, like James could play through this, then I think it's entirely possible at 2 games back of the Celtics that the Cavs could finish out at the 2 seed and avoid this possible conference semifinals matchup with the Pistons. One of the things I did want to kind of parallel here, though, is it was funny listening to your discussion. Can you explain to my listeners? Because well, no, this was just an interesting stat, and I wanted to let you deliver it rather than me. I look at Thompson and Wade similarly at times. I think Wade's a more capable shooter, obviously, but he's prone to go through bouts where he's just absent from the offense. And that's usually the biggest criticism. This is a hot topic, this conversation of should we be starting Tyson or Dean Wade, because Kenny seems really dialed in on setting the tone defensively, which is why he's going with Wade. But when we lost to the B team of the Thunder on Sunday, Dean was basically a no-show. Then he comes back and he gives us one of his best games of the season against New York Knicks. And then again, against the Bucks, he's essentially a no-show. So it's one of these things where everybody understands what he's good at, but the swing factor is if he's knocking down the shots or not. I think Thompson, in a lot of ways, kind of parallels the Dean Wade experience. He's a better defender, for sure, but he's even a more limited offensive player, to the point where the question becomes, okay, you want to put him on the floor, But if the offense is struggling because of it, can you justify it in key moments? And I think in some ways that experience kind of feels like a parallel journey that Cavs fans and Pistons fans are on. How do you feel about Thompson and how he will profile into the playoffs?
I don't know, Bob. This is part of my issue. I alluded to it earlier when you don't have a floor spacing big. And listen, as much as I love Isaiah Stewart, I assume most of Cavs fans hate Isaiah Stewart. I get it. I'm not here to defend that. The only thing I defend about Isaiah Stewart, like aggressively, is Isaiah Stewart is a good basketball player. People can miss me with he's just a fighter. He's a whatever. All like get those narratives out of here. Isaiah Stewart is a good basketball player that averages 10 points a game and plays at a very high level on the defensive end. My point with that, though, is he's actually regressed down to 32% from three. It's not a real floor spacer right now. The volume's not even there if the percentage was. So it's not solely an Asar Thompson thing, Bob. Like, I will just quickly read this off. Duncan Robinson is 40% from three on real volume. You want to guess who the next best three-point shooter on the Pistons is percentage-wise? Like guys that actually play.
I don't know. Jenkins?
It is Dennis Jenkins. Great guess.
Okay.
37%. Next is Javonte Green, who I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's crazy because we've lived that experience. Not to say he can't knock down a three, but Green is in there for very specific things, and it's not knock down three-point shooting typically.
Next is another old Cavs friend, Karis LeVert, at 36% on 3 attempts. And then let me read the rest of the rotation. Tobias Harris, 34. Cade, 34. Stu, 32. Asar, 29 on less than half an attempt a game. Ron Holland at 22% on just under 3. Herter's not even in the rotation. Jalen Duren doesn't shoot threes. The issue isn't just that Asar Thompson can't space the floor. It's that the rest of the team can't space the floor. And so it just, amplifies it by that much more. Here's been my pitch on the podcast. They went through the stretch of trying to play Asar Thompson on the ball. Like Amin plays on the ball coming through the draft process. Amin did it whenever they were with OTE, but there was some thought that maybe Asar had a little bit more in him. So they tried it. Cool. I'm fine with it. My pitch has been, it didn't work. He's not ready for it. He has to learn how to play off the ball with this spacing for this team to be successful in the playoffs. And I'm not saying they listen to me, but I do think that we've seen them lean into that post All-Star break. And so that's where he has to be good. He has to be good at stampede cuts. If you put James Harden on Asar Thompson, right? I would assume that's probably the matchups that the Cavaliers would go to. He has to get 5 offensive rebounds because James Harden is ball watching. He has to back cut him because James Harden's ball watching. He has to beat him in transition. If they get Keon Ellis switched onto him, he has to dribble in, bump Keon Ellis, and then rise into a little mid-range jumper because he's stronger and more athletic than Keon Ellis. He has to learn to do those things over these final 25 games or whatever it is. He has to be on the floor in the playoffs, Bob. He is one of the best defenders in the NBA. I think he has a first-team all-defense argument right now.
This is what I wanted you to explain. So the minutes played per game thing that you discussed. Yeah. Because, coming into that podcast, before I listened to it, I thought same thing as you. I'm like, Thompson's a lock. Is there a world where he doesn't make it because he just simply doesn't play enough minutes?
You're talking about this. So the stat that came up, because in the game, was San Antonio, right? He ended up only playing 18 minutes or less than 20 minutes. And so it was actually, I want to give credit to a commenter. They asked, like, is it in jeopardy? I didn't think there was any way he was in jeopardy. I looked it up. He had missed 4 or 5 games just outright, but then he had another 5 or 6 games where he's actually played less than 20 minutes. Now, some of those games are in the 19-minute range, but he was at 10 or 11 games already where he has either not played or not hit the 20-minute threshold. And so my point was, we are one somewhat legit, doesn't have to be a super legit ankle roll away from Asar Thompson not being the Pistons' 2 best defenders, because Isaiah Stewart will not be eligible. The Pistons' 2 best defenders may end up not being eligible for postseason awards in terms of all defense, which I think would be a disaster considering.
Now, I will celebrate it last year when Evan Mobley managed to get Defensive Player of the Year. But in general, I think defense is the way we view it as fans is what kind of impact do you make when you're in the game, it's not a cumulative thing. It's not like nobody cares who has the most blocks over the course of the season. Everybody cares way more about how much is your impact game to game. And of course, it benefited Mobley last year because of the Wemby injury, but I think it's one of the stupidest things to have this 65-game threshold on something like all defense. I
haven't workshopped it fully. I heard someone reference it on a pod the other day to the 65-game rule only applies to solely MVP. So like you have to play 65 games to be MVP, but then all NBA, whatever else, like have at it. I haven't fully thought through the pros and cons of that, but as we talk about this here, maybe that's another thing. Like DPOY, you have to have played 65 games, but then the rest of all defense, like whatever. If you think that Star Thompson in 60 games or how many ever minutes, okay, he can't be DPOY, but he's still a first-team all-defense player. I don't know. Maybe there's a contradiction there. Again, I haven't fully thought it out. It was an interesting idea I hadn't thought of yet. I'm to the point I just want to throw it out and let people make their votes. And if people, I think there would be some egregious votes. Like I think some people would vote 45 game played, whoever, still first team all NBA that I would really disagree with. Great. That would make for a great podcast segment. Let's go crazy. So,
well, I'll tell you this. I believe if Cade wins due to a games thing, like as much as Pistons fans would be happy, they're also going to hate it because people are going to.
He's going to get destroyed. Yeah.
Well, he's going to get destroyed as a vehicle to destroy the rule. Like it's not even going to necessarily be about Cade. It's going to be, look at the guy who beat Shea because he happened to fall a few games below the threshold. I think that's actually a good place where we can kind of pivot into this MVP discussion because I told you before you came on the pod, I wanted to have a conversation about this MVP thing because it's heated up. It's definitely heated up where people are looking at Cade. He destroyed the Knicks this month multiple times. They're the best team in basketball. And now he's third in the Vegas odds in terms of MVP. Shea and Jokic are still favorites. And I think, let me present this to you just to make sure, let's set some barometer stuff to feel like, okay, what are the things we agree on? Are we both of the mindset that if Shea or Jokic hit the games limit, both of them are more likely to win MVP than Cade? Or do you
Agreed.
deviate?
No. I assume we'll do this in the next week. I've been thinking about it. I would have Shea 1, Jokic 2 right now without like diving super deep into things. But yes, to me, it's like a 2-horse race at the top for actual MVP. Yes.
Okay. So good. I'm glad we can agree on that because really the direction I wanted to take this conversation was, I think what's happening is Cade is becoming the runaway favorite as number 3 on that list. I don't hear much discussion of any of the, I mean, I guess Wemby to some degree you do, but I think basically it's become a 3-man conversation and guys like Wemby, Jaylen Brown, Luka Doncic, Anthony Edwards, and then maybe Donovan Mitchell get brought up. But the conversation I wanted to have with you is, this is my contention. I'm going to lay out to you my case, and then I want to hear your thoughts, which is we have this conversation about the MVP. And I think a lot of times what factors into it is, you can simplify it down to best player on the best team. I think if that's the rationale you go with, well, then it's either going to be Shea or it's going to be Cade in those conversations, if you're factoring record to that degree. But I don't necessarily want to have this conversation about record because I understand that narratives play a huge factor in MVP. My contention is that Donovan Mitchell's season is being greatly overlooked in this conversation. And I think it began for me at the All-Star selection because Cade, Brunson, Jaylen Brown, they were all named starters in a way where Donovan Mitchell wasn't. And arguably Donovan Mitchell, at least statistically, is having a better season than all of those guys. I don't think it's really even an argument, and we'll get into more of the specifics on that. But I think the same thing is happening with the MVP discourse. Now, my belief is that's entirely because of how the Cavs season started and the expectations they came in with. But I think when all is said and done, we get into these conversations of it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And the closing punch and Donovan Mitchell, since the Cavs turned this around New Year's, they've been the hottest team in basketball. And statistically, he's every bit as worthy, if not more worthy, than everybody in the East. I'm willing to concede Shea and Jokic. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what do you think it is in your mind that would separate Cade? If I take, let me just say I concede the team success thing. What else would you turn to in presenting a case for what makes Cade a more worthy candidate than Donovan Mitchell or Jaylen Brown?
Okay. Yeah. So for what it's worth, I think after those two, I think assuming Wemby ends up being eligible, he's probably going to be a guy that I'm going to say probably needs to be on first team. And if we want to sit here and say that defense matters in the NBA, as I think he has to be there. I think Cade is the other guy right now that I would have first team All NBA. And then it would be Anthony Edwards, Donovan Mitchell, maybe Jaylen Brown. So like I told you coming into this, I've had Donovan Mitchell second team All NBA in both of our, even our quarter season one, whenever the Cavs, got to a slow start or whatever, he was still second team All NBA for me there. And I think at this point, he's above Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, those guys. So I'm looking at him right now, 6, 7, right there in that range. For Cade, I think one thing underrated with Cade Cunningham is just his assists, his creation. And I don't think, if we're talking about, everybody points to his lack of efficiency. And I get it. I hear it. I think KOC, who I've been on his podcast, I appreciate the work he does, but has made the argument that he doesn't trust Cade in the playoffs because whatever it was, the top 10 MVP vote getters, he had the worst true shooting or efficiency or whatever it was. I disagree in the terms that I don't trust him, but I understand the point, right? Like,
here's what I wouldn't understand about that. How's that relevant to a regular season award?
Sure. No, so KOC wasn't talking about it in terms of MVP voting. He was talking about it in terms of trusting the Pistons in the playoffs.
Gotcha.
So again, like I like KOC. I'm just saying that I'm using his argument as an example of what the arguments are. And again, I understand what he's saying. I have a little bit of a different opinion on my trust of Cade come playoffs. Anyway, like if you look per 100 possessions, players that have played 40 or more games, he's only behind Jokic in assists per game. And I know assists per game like isn't the only stat, right? Like I don't love to use it in terms of always to highlight creation. Now, why I think that that's important though is what have we talked about this entire podcast? What is the Pistons' flaws? Secondary scoring, 3-point shooting, all of these things. And he is still creating at that level. So that would be one thing. I will concede that Donovan Mitchell is a more efficient and better scorer because to your point, Donovan Mitchell is 5th in the NBA in points per 100 possession. He is a monster. I love watching the Cavs. I have almost 20 full game notes on the Cleveland Cavaliers. And every single game I've watched, I always write the same thing on my first line. Watching him shoot a jumper, off movement, off the dribble, off the catch, whatever, it's picture perfect. He's always on balance. He's like shooting in a phone booth, whatever thing you want to say. So I will concede the scoring. I do think Cade is a better creator. And I think Cade Cunningham is better defensively than Donovan Mitchell. Cavs fans may push back on this, but I think that Cade, I don't think it's a huge gap, but I do think that Cade is a very, very good defender for the type of offensive load and offensive usage he has to have. I think what is interesting, I want to ask you this, Bob. Who do you think carries more weight for their team offensively? Cade Cunningham. Because my argument would be is Cade carries a bigger offensive load than Donovan Mitchell. But I also watch every second of his entire career. And, I haven't watched every second of the Cleveland Cavaliers. I know Donovan has carried a huge load for the Cavs and has had to be a monster in the fourth quarter to get them in games or keep them in games. You may push back on that Donovan actually carries just as much of a load. I don't know. But that's where I would go.
I'll speak to that because there's a few things I would agree. Completely agree. Best creator of the Eastern Conference guys. I would put him above Brunson, Brown, Mitchell, or, I would concede that to Cade. I think defensively is an interesting conversation I want to dive into more. But when it comes to, I think you do hear that kind of, well, he's having to do the most with the least argument, which I think eyeball test, most of us would agree. I do think for Donovan, there's some contextualization that's missed a lot of times because the theoretical Cavs, especially now with the addition of James Harden, I do think anybody who says he doesn't have more talent around him, at least offensively, than the Pistons is being disingenuous. That would be my case there. I think where it kind of falls apart in a way is consider who Donovan's actually played along this year, though.
This
because
is fair. Yeah.
take this, for example. Here's a stat for you. Missed games by the Cavaliers roster this year. 201 games missed. Now, last year, the entire team, 168 games missed. We still have a month left of basketball, and the Cavs have missed 201 games. By comparison, now that's 8th in the NBA in terms of games missed by money, by the way, not even by total games. They're even higher than that in total games. Detroit, it's 112 games missed. That's 28th in the NBA. So they've been much more healthy. As far as these teams, the Knicks, the Pistons, the Celtics, and the Cavs have been the most injured team. We've seen that with Garland missing tons of time. Mobley's missed a significant amount of time. Harden is now going to miss some time. It's been very inconsistent in what he's had around him. So while if the Cavs were perfectly healthy, yeah, I agree. Donovan has the most talent around him, and Cade should benefit from doing more with more defensive attention put on him, with less people around him to relieve the pressure. But I think how it's actually played out this season is people are willing to point to the record of the Cavs as an indictment of Donovan without giving him any credit for what he's actually had to do in playing in the absence of these guys. The other thing is, we have this kind of bigger picture conversation about best teammates. And again, I think if I was speaking about my personal belief, I think Donovan has better teammates around him than Cade Cunningham in terms of overall skill and volume. But I do think people undersell Jalen Duren to a certain point.
Sure.
There's only one guy of those two who's had an all-star teammate right now, and that's Cade Cunningham. Jalen Duren has been a monster. 18-11 on the season. In February, he's doing 20-10, which we're talking about, Black History Month, Jarrett Allen revolutionizing the NBA and how he's averaged 22-12 over the month of February. Jalen Duren, in his last 3 games since coming back from that injury, is doing 27-14. People are underselling him to a certain extent. So it's funny to hear out of one side of the mouth of some people, I feel like we hear, well, Cade is doing, all of this with nothing around him. But I think, it's kind of disrespectful to what Jalen Duren has done over the course of this season. Because if you're basing it on something like EPM, Jalen Duren is the best second player on a team of those Eastern Conference guys. In fact, Derek White has a better EPM than Jaylen Brown. So that's the situation where it gets reversed. But when you look at these rosters, Donovan's best teammate so far this season has been Jarrett Allen, and he's at 2.7 versus Duren's 3.8. Now, that's not a be-all, end-all, but I think it balances out some of the noise as far as the way that people present him. Now, defense is the other thing I wanted to speak to. Donovan Mitchell this season actually has, now this is, again, it has to be contextualized. Nobody's going to say that Donovan's a better defender than Mobley or Dean Wade. But Donovan has a better defensive on-off than either of those guys, which is kind of crazy. Because if you look at Cade in the context of his team, you got Holland, Green, Reed, Jenkins even. He's got a better, those guys all have better on-offs than Cade. Now, Cade is good. Of those guys, Cade is clearly the best defender or the second best defender if I'm paralleling him against these other guards in the East. I think most people would give Cade the benefit because of his size, typically. And I think those are one of those things that's not a stat. They just look at that and they say, okay, well, that profile's better. But I do think, as somebody who existed in JB-led teams, I think people are underselling Donovan Mitchell's defensive impact, at least statistically, what has actually played out, which is when he's off the court, the Cavs team has got better. You look at the defensive on-off numbers and just the on-off numbers in general. If the argument is that, and I think this is something that's generally agreed upon by the majority, is that Cade is carrying the bigger load in Detroit than Donovan is. And yet, on-off-wise, Donovan Mitchell, his teams, it's 11.3 points, it's a net rate improvement of 11.3 when he's out there. Versus Cade Cunningham is an 8.1. So it's not to say that Cade isn't good, but Donovan Mitchell's teams have had an even more dramatic impact when he's been on the court. He's in the 95th percentile of on-off. Cade's 87. So they're all great. Meanwhile, Jaylen Brown in Boston, this is a crazy stat. 9th percentile on-off. The teams have gotten noticeable, 10.3 points per 100 possessions better when he's off the floor, which clearly that speaks to the fact that you can't put 100% faith in some of these numbers because nobody's going to say But I think what ends up happening is it speaks a lot to the strength of the overall roster. I think if you can look at something like on-off and you can say, okay, why is it that Boston's on-off numbers are so much better when Jalen is off the floor? It's because of the depth and quality of the pieces around him that have risen up. Whereas I think you can look at the results when Donovan has been off the floor for the Cavs, and they've been much, much worse, which I think speaks to his value. So that would kind of be two of the things that I would say on that. Now, eyeball test, I think most people would agree. Cade is probably the guy in that list, or Jaylen Brown. I mean, Jaylen Brown's numbers aren't good, but I think a lot of people would say, oh, we think Cade or Jaylen Brown are better defenders than Donovan Mitchell. My contention is Donovan Mitchell does not get enough credit for his impact on the team as a whole, or just for he's at least a defensive neutral player. At minimum, I think you have to say that. The numbers would tell you that he's been a positive defensive force on the Cavaliers.
I think it's a great point with his defense, because my argument just general is, I think I made this point on game theory about kind of how you can building out teams. And when your best player is at least neutral defensively, how much versatility that gives you to build out the rest of your roster, right? And so it was in the context of Cade Cunningham, but you can make this argument with Donovan Mitchell. If you can look at Donovan Mitchell and say he's not a negative defensively, for our best offensive player, our offensive engine, hub, whatever, he is at least neutral and maybe at times is playing above neutral. That opens up so much with the rest of your roster construction. My point with the Pistons was Cade Cunningham, for me, being better than neutral defensively allows you to have Duncan Robinson on the court as a less than neutral defensive player because you need his offense. And I think Donovan Mitchell he's not quite as tall as Cade, but he is very strong. And so, you know, the Garland thing was because Garland was so small, but I think because Donovan Mitchell is at least a neutral defender, that does allow the Cavs, if they needed to put a quote unquote negative defender on the court. The great thing about the Cavs is I don't know that there is a negative defender. I am a Sam Merrill defender in terms of where he is defensively. Like, I think he's at least neutral and can hold up just fine. And so that makes it even better. But I mentioned, and again, I just read through some of my notes. They are littered with Donovan Mitchell giving energy, like off the ball disruption. The one thing I will push back real quick, I do think Cade, I think, is a better defensive disruptor, and not by much. But they average about the same steals, but Cade is averaging a block a game. Like Cade is averaging a steal and a half and 1 block per game right now.
Yeah. And so I would say, I know that sounds, this was what I was scared of when I brought you on the podcast.
No.
I didn't want it to come off like there's a certain nature of when you're comparing guys that if one guy is worse in something than another, statistically or eyeball test or whatever, it's going to seem like I'm dragging Cade. That's really not my contention here. I think Cade is a better defender than Donovan Mitchell. I don't care what the numbers say, because a lot of those they're influenced by the team, the record, the overall defense. Those are all things that factor into a lot of these analytics. But I just think when we're having these conversations, people will, in good faith, try to tell me that Jalen Brunson should be looked at above what Donovan Mitchell's done this year. And I think what we can say from both eyeball tests and analytics is that Jalen Brunson is a negative defender. And offensively, Donovan Mitchell's been better than him. Cade, I think you can at least say, is a neutral to good defender, or positive defender, however you want to frame that. I don't think Donovan Mitchell is viewed by the NBA, commentariat in that way. And I think it's a little bit unjustified. And what I'm excited about personally, Bryce, is with the addition of Harden. While I'm not saying Harden's a lockdown defender, his size alone makes me feel like the whole defense is rising over since the new year. Basically, the defense has improved as a whole. We've gotten healthier. Tyson, Wade, Keon, Schroeder, all these additions are guys who are not liabilities on the defensive end, to the point where, to what you said, I don't think there's a lot of guys they put out there alongside him anymore who can drag the defense down as a whole. I think you can switch more. I don't think Harden is better at being able to wall up against guys who could typically just back Darius down. He may not be a great defender, but he's got super quick hands. He's strong. Those are things that we didn't necessarily have. And when you put, like, now, what we're seeing with Schroeder and Donovan playing off ball, Schroeder is such an annoying, pesky defender that even those lineups look very solid to the point that I just think it's one of these things where I see certain stuff trotted out, and I feel like what I said earlier in the pod about feeling like you guys are living a parallel existence to us. It's not just because people are trying to dismiss you before the playoffs even happen and saying, well, they're not, they're good, but this won't hold up in the playoffs. Yes, we experienced that, and then we pooped our pants against the Pacers. So, like, we kind of injuries played a factor, but it panned out the way people said it would. It didn't work out. But my contention is now the other big parallel here, and this upsets me. This is the one that upsets me. Last year, Shea wins the MVP. We get into this conversation where I hear people say, well, Cade's a legitimate MVP candidate because he's on the best team in the NBA and he's their best player. This exact date, 1 year ago, the Cavaliers were 48-10, which was better than Oklahoma City. They had a 6.5 game lead on the second place team in Boston. Now, that's at the time, the Cavs finished with 64 wins because they took their foot off the gas intentionally in March because they were way, way up. They had a 7-game lead going into the month on Boston. Right now, the Pistons are 43-14. That's a 62 win pace. They're 5.5 up on second place Boston. They're just ahead of Oklahoma City. They're being talked about, like Cade is being talked about in a way that Donovan was not at all. Donovan finished that season 5th place in MVP voting. And when you look at what's happened year to year, this was like Donovan last year. This is the other thing I think people overlook. He's much better this year, just from a pure, if you're a counting stats person, 4.5 points more per game. He's the only one of those 4 guys over 60% true shooting. He's the only one who's gone up in all of them. Field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, true shooting percentage, points per game. All of them have been dramatically better for Donovan Mitchell. And you would think he's having a worse season than he did last year, which I think is entirely because of how the Cavs as a team started the season. So part of my desire in bringing you on here and selling you on numbers and data and all these things is because you do get to bend the ear of a national audience on a daily basis. And I think people are under indexing just how impressive Donovan Mitchell's season has been. Now, of those guys, Brunson, Cade, Mitchell, and Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown has gone up 7 points a game, basically, in the absence of Jason Tatum. Donovan Mitchell has gone up 5 points a game, and they've added James Harden. It's a team that's got deeper in theory. Like, yes, they've been injured, so some of that accounts for it. And yes, he's playing slightly more minutes this year than he was last year. But he has been even more impressive, and it's getting lost. And I was willing to stomach it for the All-Star stuff because it's the All-Star game. What does it matter? But I cannot tell you how many MVP conversations I've heard discussed where Jaylen Brown gets brought up, at least as a name to discuss, where even Jalen Brunson gets brought up, and where Donovan Mitchell is an afterthought. And that's the part that I think I find this conversation a little bit insulting because the Cavs were in the exact same position last year and Donovan wasn't talked about like a legitimate MVP candidate. And maybe that's just because OKC was having a historical season, whereas this year they're not quite on that base. But I wanted your thoughts on that.
The issue last year was I looked at all 4 of my whatever from last season. I don't have like a real vote, but we do it on the podcast. I had Donovan 5th or 6th every single vote all season long in my MVP. And essentially I had Jokic, Shea, Giannis, Tatum 1 through 4 all year long. That 5th spot moved around. It was Luka at one point, Wemby at one point, and then Donovan took it over for the final 2. We do it quarterly. I remember people trying to tell me that Donovan Mitchell wasn't the best player on the Cavs last year. I think that's what hurt Donovan Mitchell last year was people were like, oh no, it's Garland.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, I remember having that conversation with you around Christmas because up until basically he choked that game away at the free throw stripe and then things all kind of slid off a little bit. Pre-All-Star break, Darius Garland was a 50-40-90 walking bucket. It tailed off a little bit, and of course we know how the playoffs played out. But you know what? That is a good point. I didn't really even think about that. It is funny looking at these awards, how I do feel like they're so narrative driven because I feel like Jalen is getting such credit for how that team is doing. when it's not a moment to step back and say, like, for me, this is a moment where we should all step back and say, maybe we over-indexed on how harsh we were on an injury-riddled Cavs team in the first half of the season, and maybe we under-indexed on Boston, and instead what it's becoming is, Jaylen Brown is a legitimate MVP candidate, and Donovan Mitchell is I feel like we're at a point of no return where people didn't discuss him earlier in the season, and so now I don't know that he'll be able to get back into these conversations by the end of the season.
So just kind of I think there's 8 guys that would be the first automatic 8 names that I would put before you get to some of these others. And he would be one of those 8 names, right? And I haven't hatched it out enough to know, does that mean he's going to be, the 5th guy on first team? Does it mean he's number 6? But the 2 guys we mentioned that I think it's still ultimately that conversation, I think Cade and Wembanyama would be 4. And then the next 4 names would be Edwards, Brown, Mitchell, and Doncic. And I'm starting to struggle a little bit with Luka because of that Lakers team in general. And that was not necessarily in any order. But to me, those 8, based on team success, individual play, two-way play, all of that, obviously not Luka, has separated themselves from even a Tyrese Maxey, a Jalen Brunson, and then I don't even know where I would go after that. I'd have to really dive into it. So I think that's where I would be, and I think Donovan could be as high as 5, I think, for me, if I really got into it. I'm usually an Edwards guy, but I think your point,
6th or 7th, personally. As much as I think Donovan will end up 6th or 7th in voting.
I think so too.
Because I think Brown will get more votes than him. So simply because the team's done good and his counting stats are great. There's no arguing that. Doncic, Edwards, Mitchell, all those guys I would put. I think it'll be a travesty if Brunson finishes before him in the votes. But those other 2, Luka and Edwards, I could see them. Those 3 guys, to me, they could finish in any order between 6 and 8.
So I know Bontemps recently had his, and I don't remember what the order was now, but if I had to guess, I think you have the top 2. If these guys all ended up eligible, I wonder if the rest of the first team isn't Wembanyama, Cunningham.
I think 4 are a lock already. I agree with you. Cade and Wemby, to me, it's not. They're going to finish his first team All-NBA.
So then it really comes down to the 5 spot, and I just don't know where people are going to end up on Doncic. And the Wolves are so weird in terms of they'll have an impressive game and then not. And so
I think Brown is going to edge those guys out. It could be Luka. It could be Brown. I think it'll depend. Statistically speaking, you would obviously say, oh, it's going to be Luka. But I think people are really going to put a lot of – and, it's funny because with all NBA teams, a lot of times it does really just boil down to counting stats. They'll give a lot more. MVP – the team record comes into play, but a lot of times all NBA people overlook it. But there's just something about the fact that I feel like Boston guys always get a bump on all NBA teams to a certain extent. And I think when you look at those voter tallies at the end of the year and you see the names who have votes, I'm like, there's a disproportionate amount of people with Boston ties in these voting records that that's my hot take, I guess, is I think Brown will finish above Luka on all NBA this year. Maybe that's
not to shout out, I love my guy Omari Sankofa, and I know he takes it very, very serious. And so this isn't
with Omari. I feel like the Jaren Jackson Jr. over Evan Mobley thing was influenced by some collegial ties. That's my case. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just sour grapes a couple of years ago when the man played 1,000 less minutes than Evan Mobley, but got Omari's vote. I was disappointed.
Omari also has the Grizzly ties. My point here, though, is I don't think beat writers should have the vote. I love Omari. And again, I know he takes it very, very serious. And I'm sure all the others do. Bob, what is the job of a beat writer?
I tell you this, they set them up to fail because
correct.
If you put them in a situation where they cast a vote against their own guy, how does that serve the beat writer?
Publicly.
Yeah. And it gets released. If Omari goes at most improved player, he doesn't vote for Duren. How is that going to be received amongst the people who actually are responsible? Not to say that the readers are responsible for his salary, but they're his constituency, essentially, turning them against him for the sake of objectivity is like, it's noble, Omari, but I would rather just not do it.
Well,
it's a
my
lose-lose.
point was Omari's job is to follow the Detroit Pistons 11 months out of the year and watch their games from their perspective and write articles about how they played. I'm not saying Omari doesn't understand the game. I know he does. We have conversations about other players. I'm not saying I should have a vote. I'm sure people have listened to this and be like, man, Bryce doesn't know ball. Why would we give him a vote? All I'm saying is I don't know that we're always picking the best people to vote whenever you have 30 people whose sole job is to watch one singular team out of a league of 30 teams. It's not their fault. I love those guys that I've met. I respect their jobs so much. You know, James Edwards was really good to me. All of these Pistons beat writers, their job is to only watch and analyze the Pistons. You can't tell me they have the best possible perspective out of a pool of 100 people to vote on a league-wide award and awards in general.
Can I offer a counterpoint, though?
Sure.
Let's take some of the people on the national level who have votes, who are doing these games on national broadcast.
Fair enough.
Do you actually believe that they're watching all the games? Yeah.
No,
see,
I don't. Okay, never mind. You're right.
Delete
this out. That was a bad point.
You get those foreign votes, too, where you're like, wait, what? Dennis Schroeder, who's the German guy, voted Dennis Schroeder first team All-NBA. Like I don't think it's not just the beat writers. It's also you see the NBA has made this effort to validate some international votes along the way, and those are just as subject to biases and influences too. I think it's almost impossible to expect that the Sams of the world are out there, the Zach Lowe's, just like gobbling up tape of every team and truly coming at something from an objective standpoint. But I would agree with you. I think it's more susceptible to biases from the beat guys because it's just they're so entrenched for 82
and that's what I wasn't throwing shade at beat guys. I want to be clear here.
No,
it was. I think they're putting
hurt you would that nobody's taking it that way. I think you're pointing out flaws in the system. It's not about the people participating in the system.
It's the context they're in. Yeah. Here's what I will say. Again, people may think I'm an idiot. They may disagree with my takes, whatever. I have receipts of the games I've watched this year and the notes I've taken. And one thing I've come to kind of believe is I don't know how good I am at this, but I don't know this how many people can pull up. Like I have 15 full Blazers games of notes that I could pull up right now. And whenever I say like that's pages of notes on the Blazers. I mentioned it earlier. I can pull on my Cavaliers Google folder, 19 full games of notes on the Cleveland Cavaliers. My point here is this is really hard. Like I'm doing everything I can to cover the entire league as well as possible, be able to speak intelligently beyond just, stats and, EPM, whatever, all that stuff. It is not easy to do. So to your point, I don't know that there is a pool of 100 people you could even come to that, we get the best votes. Usually it ends up being fine. I don't have major qualms with it. It's tough. It's tough to cover the whole league. 30 teams, as many games as there are. Eventually you just get tired of watching some of the teams as well. Like we don't need to get into the tanking thing, but it's like, you know what? There's more important things than watching the Wizards right now or the Jazz or, the Nets. So you start to kind of filter those teams out and focus more on the Cleveland Cavaliers who made the biggest noise at the deadline. So I want to see what the new look Cavs look like.
Yeah, I feel I guess there's two more things I wanted to touch on this podcast with you. Then I'll cut you loose. But how do you feel about this Cavs team post-Harden in terms of your view of it before versus now? Do you think, because I think a lot of the discussion to some extent is the discourse when it happened was, well, James is more available and, James is better at feeding the bigs. I think those are the two biggest selling points essentially is he'll do a better job involving the big guys and he'll do a better job of just staying on the court in postseason. Do you have concerns about this Cavalier roster? Because I think, James has his playoff warts in the past. How do you think this works out both short-term and long-term when assessing that trade?
I think it has better chance to turn out positive in the short term. I think hopefully for the Cavs, they get the Harden honeymoon stage throughout the rest of the year and into the playoffs. And then I have no idea after that. We have a history of James Harden not being places for very long, or at least being happy in those places. And I have no idea what Cleveland is going to work out contract monetary wise and all of those things. Here is the best compliment I can give. I love the trade to get Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder. I've mentioned that a couple times, how much I love Keon Ellis, Schroeder as well, in terms of what he provided the Pistons. I had somebody ask me, was I more or less worried about the Cavaliers in terms of a Pistons perspective before or after the trade? And I pretty strongly felt like it was after the trade. I think it's harder to attack them defensively, to your point. I think Harden's probably still a negative defender, but the size, the hands, the context of what he's in now, you can probably find a way to hide him and use the quote unquote strengths that he does have. And then we talked about this on the Pistons polls. How does a team like Detroit match up now? I want Asar Thompson on Donovan Mitchell, but then I have to put Cade Cunningham on James Harden. You know how you really make Cade Cunningham inefficient? Get him in foul trouble and put him on the bench or take away. And what does James Harden do really good? Draw fouls.
Well, speaking of, I don't know if you've noticed the trend since Harden came to the Cavs, but his trips to the stripe have completely vanished. Did not even get get a free throw the other night for the first. It was 9 times in his whole career that he's got 0 free throw attempts. He would have done it twice in these 7 games he's played for the Cavs, if not for intentional fouls at the end of the Kings win. So he's gone from over 8 free throw attempts per game to sub 5 free throw attempts per game.
Well, when LeBron James is on this roster next year, you guys will get all the calls and lead the NBA in free throw attempts.
You better. Okay, one more thing I got to add. The audience may not know that you're also an educator, but as an educator, are you talking to children about Jarrett Allen's exploits during Black History Month? Is he part of the curriculum?
So here's the problem with kids these days. They only watch NBA basketball via TikTok and Instagram and all of that. So their favorite player is LaMelo Ball because they think LaMelo Ball is the best player in the NBA, or whoever. So the kids know I do podcasts. I don't think they realize like I do real podcasts. It's legitimate. We don't have. I don't want to say out a number because I started out with 50 people watching and listening. So I don't want to. If you're out there and you're just starting, keep grinding, you'll continue to grow. So like they try to talk to me about the NBA sometimes, like Mr. Simon, do you know Harden got traded to the Cavs? Yes, little Johnny. I know it's legitimately my job to know.
Marathon last night. I'm aware.
I'm aware. So I would guess I have 130 students, maybe 120. I would guess 5 would raise their hand if I asked them if they knew who Jarrett Allen was.
Well, after this month, that number's going through the roof, Bryce. Because
he's
I
think
this month, player of the month for me, it's him. I just want to hit these stats before we're out of here because it is something that I think has been overlooked to a certain extent this month, is that Jarrett Allen has been an absolute beast, and the national discourse to some extent has been attributing it to James Harden. But he hung that 40 burger on Portland before James Harden even got there. And when he did 29 last night against the Bucks, or 2 nights ago, whenever this airs, that was without James Harden. This month, 8th leading scorer in the Eastern Conference, leading offensive rebounder with over 4 a game, leading rebounder with 12 a game, 10th in blocks, and first in player impact estimate. The team is 8-2 as well. So he also has the team success. So being that this is the end of February, I just want to put in one final push for a completely meaningless, trivial, monthly award in the NBA. But if anybody deserves Eastern Conference Player of the Month, it's Jarrett Allen. And I hope he's recognized for that. And I hope that by the time you're listening to this podcast, Cavalier fans, we will be celebrating just a fantastic bookend to an incredible month of basketball from the Fro. Bryce, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for talking Pistons. Thank you for talking the MVP race. Everybody should be checking out the Game Theory podcast with Bryce and Sam Vecini, and the Pistons Pulse with Bryce and Omari and, Wes and the whole gang there. And the puppy picture, I did check that out. I listened to your last podcast, and whoever put together the show notes on Spotify was nice enough to put a direct link to the puppy, and I got to see, and it's adorable. We have a puppy photo channel on the Fear the Fro Discord as well, so it's always well appreciated by this audience.
Yeah, the producer was like, hey, can you like tweet out a picture of the puppy so that way I can put it in the description or whatever? I was like, okay, well, so Winnie will make a quick appearance here at the end of the podcast. So,
yeah, okay, now I have to put it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I will be editing this and throwing it up. That is adorable. Well, that's fantastic, Bryce. Thank you, man, for carving out so much time. We're doing this early in the morning. He is taking time out of his day to join the
no school today. Parent-teacher conferences yesterday, so we get Friday off.
I was like, what kind of school do you go to where they just give you Fridays off? I can't. Is it a holiday? What's going on?
There's a lot of 4-day school around the area. We are not one, but yeah. So since we did 8 hours of parent-teacher conferences yesterday, they give us the next day off. So 3-day weekend for us.
Well, Bryce, I love every time we get to do this. I hope you guys all check out his work. Also, Motor City Hoops Substack. He alluded to a lot of the game notes and things that he's doing. And if you want to read more about that stuff, I'll put all the links in the show notes. I'll get those from Bryce, and you can check out all of his work as well. And thank you for supporting Cavs fans. Hopefully these injuries and these guys sitting out, it's more precautionary than long-term. And I hope that we can get a decent effort in these games against the Pistons. But honestly, I'm feeling great about the roster. I think you got to look at what happened against the Bucks as a victory. We lost the game, but only because that ball was on Jarrett Allen's fingertips for just a 10th of a second too long. Keon Ellis, the best game I've ever seen from him. Admittedly, it's a fairly small sample, but Dennis Schroeder, absolutely amazing. And you got to feel good about the depth. If this is long-term with James Harden, or if it's lingering, or if Donovan Mitchell's groin flares up, we are way more equipped to handle that moving forward. So till the next time, I'm Bob Schmidt. He's Bryce Simon. This is the Fear the Fro podcast. Thank you very much.